Who came out on top in the battle of the show hosts in round 8 of the Major League Rugby season, and a fantasy matchup decided by just 1/10 of a point. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 12 of the Fantasy Ruckers show. Thank you so much to our league members. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers community members. And thank you so much to everyone else tuning in and following us along on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And as always, we are the Fantasy Ruckers, and with me are my show hosts, Devin Vanderpool, Matt Yee, and guys, got a jam-packed show here today. Lots of exciting announcements to come. Lots of exciting fantasy results. Got lots to get to here. But before we hop right into it, how are you guys feeling after round 8 here of the Major League Rugby season?
Yeah, 2 out of 3 of us are fantasy ruckers. 1 out of 3 of us is a fantasy sucker. That's all I can say.
Nah, hey, 7th place doesn't taste that much better than 8th, but nah,
you know what?
Good fantasy performance, terrible real life performance seems to be the thing.
It's gonna take a while, for your Utah Warriors and the fantasy results to kind of line up here for you to have a good, just enjoyable rugby week. But it sounds like, Vandy, so far you haven't been able to get that yet. Utah Warriors struggling a little bit for you.
We haven't been able to line up wins with each other, but it'll happen.
We'll get there. And yeah, it was an exciting round 8 in the MLR. Lots of fun matchups, lots of fun fantasy results, and close fantasy matchups in our Fantasy Ruckers League. And we're going to break that all down for you in this episode number 12. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, make sure you give us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers on all of our social media channels: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can find us there. You'll get all the latest info and updates when it comes to fantasy rugby in the MLR and our league in particular. So you'll be able to follow us along there. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do all that good stuff. So before we get into it, guys, and we got some news and notes here, so we're gonna hop right in because we got a jam-packed show. And we got a lot to break down for our fantasy rugby fans and fantasy rugby listeners. But before we get into that part of it, got some news and notes to talk about when it comes to the league, but also some news and notes here when it comes to the Fantasy Rucker. So a little bit of housekeeping to take care of here at the start of the show, and we'll begin with a exciting announcement here for our league. We've had a little bit of challenges here for the first 8 weeks, and I think everyone has realized that in order for this fantasy rugby league to work, with how manual it is and how much of I guess minutes and hours it is to take to go in and put in the stats and all these things, it really requires the league members to put just as much of a commitment as well. And Matt and Vandy, you guys can speak to this. It takes just as much as a commitment from you guys to keep track of everything using spreadsheets. We don't have the app and all these things, so it takes a lot of work from your part too. And with that, we have actually had to switch over a team owner in our league with that in mind. So unfortunately, due to some outside circumstances, the former owner, Ryan of Tijuana Hookers, has had to drop out and hand his team over to someone else, and we are going to be welcoming in, and he has got his first taste in round 8 of fantasy rugby in the MLR, and that is Steven. Steven will now be joining the league. He is a avid rugby fan. Yes, we got to give him a round of applause. So welcome, Steven, to the official Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League. He's an avid rugby fan. He, I think, competes with digesting the most rugby, I think, in our league. We all watch a lot of rugby, but he's right up there when it comes to loving the MLR. So we're really excited to have him. He's been a great part of our league so far, been interacting with the league. He was interacting with the league even before he actually got the opportunity to join, which is exactly what we want to see. We want to grow this fantasy rugby community and make it a thing that anyone, whether you're in the league or not, to just come into our Discord channel and just converse and talk about fantasy rugby. He was doing that, got the opportunity here to get a team, and now he's rolling right along. So welcome, Steven, to the official Fantasy Ruckers League.
Woo! Way to go, Steven. And you came into the L column.
You got a team that's better than the two hosts. Congratulations.
Yeah, way to go.
I mean, that's not a lot to ask, though, guys. I mean, you're stepping in the league. It's basically a given, right, at this point.
You know.
There we go. We'll step it back a little bit. Can't go too harsh. We'll get into the breakdowns and the results. I will say, though, Vandy.
I'm big up here, bud.
Well, that's what we got to get to, Vandy. We got to get to. It was a tale of two tales here for you two meeting up in the battle of the hosts. So I know a lot of our listeners are excited to hear how that turned up. And before we get that, let's talk about the second big announcement. And guys, this is one that we're really excited to bring to all of you listening and all of you watching on YouTube. We have been asked by a special television network here that produces some rugby content for the Rugby Network and also makes an appearance every Tuesday on Fox Sports 2. And that is MLR All Access has approached the Fantasy Ruckers asking to interview us about this project. And hey, maybe we can spread the word about fantasy rugby. So just wanted to get the word out there to all of our listeners. We will be doing a little interview with MLR All Access. And if everything works according to plan, should be on their MLR All Access show next Tuesday and bring fantasy rugby to the people out there who haven't been able to hear it yet. I'm really, really excited for this. I think this is a huge opportunity for us to grow fantasy rugby and grow fantasy rugby, particularly in the MLR.
And maybe this means we're going to get some stats from the MLR.
Hey.
The MLR will finally hear us calling out their name, and they'll hop on board.
Matt, when you're on that show, keep the same energy, bud.
Yeah, I'll keep the
when
same
you're chirping
sadness
the cameras and everything, you got to keep that
sorrow.
same energy.
I'll bring the same depression of else.
No, we need to turn this around, man.
Yeah,
we got to turn around, man. You got to be more optimistic here. This is going to be episode 12 is all about optimism.
Big Bong theory. Like I'm at the top of the league, getting dubs all the time. That's what I'm going to bring to the show. I'm going to advertise it real well for the old commish.
You know what the worst part is? I'm beating you and you use me as a stepping stone to get on live television.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Hey, they said I knew my stuff.
Apparently, I don't know. The fantasy results don't show it, but hey, maybe we'll be able to show it next Tuesday. But yes, everyone listening, hopefully we'll be on MLR All Access next week. Make sure to stay tuned on all the social media channels we mentioned before at the Fantasy Ruckers. We will be making updates there. Keep you guys posted on when that is actually happening. Should be a lot of fun. So that's some housekeeping stuff with regards to the Fantasy Ruckers League. Excited to have Steven along and excited to be growing the fantasy rugby word across the MLR community. Let's hop into some news and notes here before we get into the round 8 breakdown of some.
Can I present this news? Let me do the first one.
Hold on, let me introduce the news first, Matt. Come on. I got some news here. Round 8 news, some latest stuff to bring up here with things that are going on in this past week. And I feel like a lot has gone on. And yeah, Matt, why don't I let you bring up this first news that is a pretty big one.
Yeah, so word on the street now. This isn't official. This is heard it through the grapevine. But what I heard was that, unfortunately, the Dallas Jackals, 9 players, fell from a 7-foot walkway and have all been injured for at least 1 to 2 weeks. Pretty big news considering I was planning on maybe picking up one, and I already had one in my lineup, so that's great news for me. The second part of that, though, and that I heard through the grapevine, is that maybe this was some sort of sabotage by the Guiltini because they don't want to get an L against the Dallas Jackals.
All right, now you're feeding some propaganda. This is not good. We can't. No, hold on. Before we get any legality issues and before we do any through the grapevine crap, Matt, let's get the story straight. It is not through the grapevine. It is official. Yes, this was a big news that came out just a couple days ago, I believe. Yeah, a huge Dallas Jackals were on bye, but there was a huge announcement that was made by the team that apparently, yeah, some players, 9 players in total, fell from a 7-foot walkway and are seriously injured. And we were able to break down through the website on some of the injuries that did happen. So I'm going to list some down for you because I think this is going to have some fantasy rugby implication. Obviously, like Matthew mentioned, some of you guys have these players in the lineups. There are also some signings here that also happen in correspondence to this, in order to fill those empty roster positions as those players are dealing with those injuries. So yes, there's 9 total players that are injured from the Dallas Jackals. That is confirmed. That is official. So you'll have to make those adjustments here. Some things that were listed on the Jackals website. Apparently Henry Trinder was the one that took the worst of it. It looks like he's going to be needing surgery to fix his injuries. Sounds like he's going to be out approximately 3 months. So it sounds like he will not be back this season. And Trinder was someone that I think people had a lot of optimism for this fantasy rugby season, was drafted in our first inaugural draft is kind of as a sleeper here on Dallas, but unfortunately his fantasy rugby campaign and his MLR campaign comes to an end, unfortunately, in 2022. Ned Hodgson, it looks like he took a knock to the head along with a knee injury. He's going to be out expected 6 weeks. So that's a big loss as well. And then you have some other players here: Torres, Rora, Naposki, Rizzo, Denishan, Kohlberg, Gleave. They're all relatively minor injuries compared to Henry Trinder's and Ned Hodgson's. They'll be out for a few weeks. So all in all, man, this incident was pretty big and obviously has implications both in a fantasy rugby world and also in the season for the Dallas Jackals. Losing 9 players is not something that happens on a regular basis, and trying to replace that on players that are notable players as well is going to be a big issue and a big challenge for this Dallas Jackals team that is still looking for their first dub and has struggled here in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like that first dub might not come for a little bit just because they lost some pretty notable guys. And I mean, Naposki is one of those guys that I think was scoring almost a try a game for them. I might have it wrong there, but he was scoring for them. And that was one of the positive notes for them, and that they were able to kind of score tries even when they're losing. And I think losing these 9 guys is just going to be a big hit. And, I mean, wish those boys a speedy recovery, because that's a tough one, especially when it happens off the field.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing, right, Matt, is that this is something that it probably should have. I don't know the details, and I'm not going to even touch what Matthew was saying.
Well, where's this walkway? What is this walkway?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know.
This is crazy.
What I'm picturing here is kind of like a similar situation to what happened with Jalen Hurts with the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, I'm thinking like something happened at the facilities. They were all walking on and something. I mean, we don't have any details. I'm not going to go to the extent. Obviously, we're just kidding when we're saying that the Giltinis did it on purpose. We're not saying that at all. But this is a serious matter, and it's one that's very unfortunate that has huge implications both in fantasy and in reality as well. So yeah, wishing these guys a speedy recovery, because you never want to see anyone get injured, whether it's on or off the field. Just quickly, some stuff to wrap up that news. Some of the players that the Dallas Jackals have signed for replacements of those players. A permanent signing is Charlie Hola. He's a second row, back row player from NOLA. He was formerly a Utah Warriors select player, and he is a USA age grade international player. So he could be a nice signing there, even when the players do return for Dallas. And then some temporary loans to get Dallas through this tough time. Obviously, Carson Schumacher, a back row from Utah. He's a U20 USA international. He joins the Dallas Jackals on loan, and also comes along with Augusto Bohm, who we've seen before as a hooker for Seattle. We've seen him make an appearance this year. He's a regular starter for Chile, actually. And then Jack Webster also coming over from NOLA. He's going to be there on loan as well. So pretty big and kind of shocking news that came out. Matt and I were sitting there and saw it, and it was just really, really random and unfortunate. So don't really think there's not much else to really cover on this. Like we said, not many details on this matter, which is kind of expected, but we do know the players that were involved, and we hope that they recover in a quick amount of time and we see them back in on the pitch soon. Let's move on to some other news here, guys. That was the big one, but another big one coming out is head coach Andrew Douglas has left and departed Old Glory DC and will no longer be their head coach. That decision and that move takes action effective immediately. Coach Douglas was the very first and only head coach so far in DC's history. Obviously, they're struggling a little bit this season. They don't mention what the decision or how the decision came to be about. So we can only assume that it had something to do with their performance so far, having not yet also getting a win, sitting in that same boat as Dallas. But kind of an interesting move. Usually you don't see these things midway through a season, but hey, it looks like Old Glory DC kind of sees it as a lost campaign right now and is looking ahead to the future.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But this thing was broken; they had to fix it. So,
yeah, but I feel like sometimes the cop out in sports is fire the head coach.
Right.
You know, and I don't want to use it as a cop out here. I don't know how they played last year, but I mean, it's pretty brutal start to the season. It's easier to let go of a head coach than some players, I guess, but.
Yeah, it should be interesting. It sounds like they will be looking to establish an interim head coaching structure as soon as possible, and their interviews and their search for a head coach globally. They're not even just saying they're looking around the globe in the rugby community to replace Douglas. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess lost cause season. Why not make the change now and start looking ahead? Obviously, sitting at 0-7, your expectations on making the playoffs is not really high at this point, more than halfway through the season. So that's a little bit of notes from Old Glory DC. Some little smaller news coming out of the league. Samuel Felix Kalapu, he is getting a 3-week suspension for his violation in this past week. He will be getting a 3-week suspension for a dangerous tackle that he did in this past week's match. And then also a injury on the injury notes. Mason Flesh, a back row player for Toronto, he will miss the rest of the 2022 season with a torn ACL, so he will be out as well. And then finally, guys, just to end some news. I feel like a lot of this news has been kind of depressing, suspensions, injuries, and crap like that. Let's go into some more positive news and something a little bit more fun. In round 8, a little bit of a tidbit, and this comes from Steel Leon, the guy we've shouted out before on Reddit, who comes up with these interesting tidbits all the time. Round 8 was the very first round in the history of the MLR where all away teams won their matches. Not a single home team won their matches in this past week. It was all away teams. Hasn't happened yet in the history of the MLR. Fun tidbit, right now it's 153 wins for home teams versus 114 losses. But right now, away sides are leading at 27 wins to 19 losses. So for some reason, playing away is having its effect on this season so far. And with that being said, that is your news and notes. Some pretty big fantasy implications there, guys. But I think it's time to move on here to the round 8 breakdown that everyone has been waiting for. So let's get right into it with this round 8 breakdown. It was an exciting week of rugby, I think, both from a fantasy and a real perspective. Had a lot of implications in the standings, some pretty big upset losses when it comes to the MLR teams, and then some pretty big dubs for some of our fantasy managers. So let's get right into it and let's talk about these matchups. Let's remember that it was a pretty big bye week, and I noticed that for you fantasy managers, and you guys can speak on this, Vandy and Matt, how difficult did you guys find it with the 3-team bye? I know a lot of teams, fantasy teams, were having a struggle picking up players and not wanting to drop certain guys because they were on bye or they weren't playing and they needed to pick up a guy because a guy they did had was on bye. How did you find? I think this is our second week of a big bye week of having 3 teams or more on bye. How did you guys find navigating through this week of byes?
Last week was harder. I mean, there was less teams on byes, but teams last week decided to play guys who you didn't expect them to start, and that was more difficult for me. This week was, I mean, I have a few San Diego guys and one Gilgroni, and I mean, I guess one Dallas Jackal guy who unfortunately is not going to be on my team any longer. It wasn't too bad. I mean, at least they could fit on my bench.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's from a volatility standpoint. I mean, it's whether it's buys, lineups, not being in the line, but never. I feel like moves need to be made every week.
Yeah, I agree, but I would say this one was especially tough with how much stock I have in hey,
not tough enough, buddy. Not tough enough.
Yeah, come on.
In San Diego,
I had two Gilgronis and I had three Legion guys. So I mean, it was pretty tough. I had to make a lot of moves. A lot of last minute. Me and Ryan kind of. I'm like, all right, I'll take this guy, and Ryan's like, yeah, I don't think you will. But no, it was tough, but I mean, got it done and pulled out the W.
Yeah, we did. So let's get into those matchups, and then we'll talk about the fantasy results when it comes to that. But let's start with this Rugby Atlanta New England Free Jacks match that started off our Saturday. Big dub here by the New England Free Jacks, 41 to 27. Not really a result that I had expected. I think last episode I was talking about how I really expected Rugby Atlanta to come out on top here. I was really liking what they're doing, but I think coming out of this match, what I realized is that this New England Free Jacks team is one that should not be messed with because they could arguably be the best team in the MLR right now. I don't think it's a far-fetched thing to say with that when it comes to the Free Jacks.
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching the game, I mean, Atlanta looked like they were in control at the start. They looked like they're in control, but then I think the big turning point was that stupid Mitch Wilson intercept 70-meter try that ruined both me and Rugby Atlanta. But I mean, Atlanta they looked good from the start. They just seemed to not be able to keep the foot down, and New England kind of showed their true form.
And I think that's what's dangerous with this New England team is that they have the ability, whether it's a deserved try like this, the Mitch Wilson steal, they have the ability. I don't know what it is, but it just seems like a lot of their players are in the right spot at the right time, and they hit off these massive plays, whether it's Mitch Wilson in this round, or I remember Bodine Walker a couple rounds ago against I think it was Rugby New York in that match where it was like 2 intercept tries or 2 fumble tries where he took it to the house, I think 40-meter plus. And I don't know if it's luck, I don't know if it's the way that New England plays, but it just seems that they always have this ability or this tendency to hit off on these explosive plays. So from a fantasy perspective, you absolutely love that. And I guess in matches like against Rugby Atlanta, where it's going to come close and it's going to be a few key decisions that are going to determine the result of the match, those are going to go a long way for you. So let's talk about some of those fantasy performances by some of the New England Free Jacks players. Just going down the list here, Matt, you mentioned it, Mitch Wilson, the big performer from this one, 18.3 points. What I was surprised with this, Vandy, at least with your team, was that Mitch Wilson kicks. I did not know he kicked. And
I think something's wrong with Bodine Walker. I think that's the only reason.
I don't know, but 18.3 points.
Mitch Wilson, you were complaining about him last week and the week before that. And this week, because of buys, you decide to put him in your starting lineup.
Hey,
and what happens? He scores an intercept try. What I
generally,
saw that
when
night
on people on this podcast, it seems to do me well. And generally, when you drop a guy, he goes off. I mean, we got our curses and our blessings, man.
I got all curses, no blessings on this side.
But 18.3 fantasy points for Mitch Wilson. Some other big performers: LaRue, Milan, I think 10.1 fantasy points. Harry Barlow, 8.2 fantasy points. Wayne Vanderbank, he got a big one there, 7.1 fantasy points at the end of that match. The Free Jacks set piece coming in pretty big at 5 fantasy points there as well. And then I got to mention it just because I got to mention it. It wasn't a top performer, but once again, Bodine Walker getting 5 points. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just every single week. It's just these. If it's not 20 points, if it's not 15, he's going to get you at least 5 or 6 or something like that.
You know what might have been that big deciding factor of that game is Rugby Atlanta set piece, 0 points. I know because I got him. Marco Jans Vons Dons Monsberg. I don't think he got any points this week. He didn't score, that's for sure.
Nope.
So
didn't score.
I think maybe that was the key, and New England figured it out, and they
were playing a pretty stout defense, though. I'll be honest.
Yeah, they were. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time. It's the same thing they did against Rugby New York.
Yeah, it's true.
I will say
They
too
find
is
a
that
way to like inhibit the big play and then pull like the trap card. Boom. Then they run one off for Mitch Wilson 70 meter.
Well, what I'll say is that we did talk about this last show where when we were ranking these teams and we said, hey, Rugby Atlanta, they look like they have the pieces, but obviously it's pretty clear that it's their forward pack that is carrying that squad, or I shouldn't say carrying, but is the strength of that squad. And hey, if the New England Free Jacks are able to mitigate that and able to kind of neutralize the effectiveness of their forward pack, hey, you will be able to get dubs like this against a pretty good team. But let's talk about the performances of Rugby Atlanta then. 10.4 points by Will Leonard. That was a big performance there. 6.9 fantasy points for Connor Cook. Matthew's shaking his head because he dropped Will Leonard, and he continues to make it true that the players he drops does well. So hint, hint, league members, take a look out for that waiver wire come Friday morning. And if there's some guys there that catches your eye that was dropped by Matty, he may be some helpful advice to go pick up those guys based on the pattern that has been shown so far this season. But that being said, Tarangatira Waitokia, 7.7 fantasy points. Kirk Coleman coming through with the boot, consistently 4.5 fantasy points for him as well. So Rugby Atlanta, New England Free Jacks, pretty fun matchup. Lots of fantasy points to be had, which is what you would expect for a match that scored almost 70 points total. I did not expect the Free Jacks to come out top, but they did, and it looks like they're the team to be reckoned with. And it's not surprising that they also have the number one fantasy player on their squad as well in Bodine Waka. Anything else on that New England Free Jacks Rugby Atlanta match, guys? All right, so let's move on here to Old Glory DC Nola Gold, and not really a surprising result, maybe a surprising score, but not a surprising result. 31-22 Nola Gold on top. Old Glory DC continue their struggles, and maybe this was the hammer in the coffin for head coach Andrew Douglas, not being able to get a win against a Nola team that is struggling as well this season so far at times. Guys, initial thoughts on the match before I start breaking down some of these fantasy performances.
Yeah, I mean, I personally didn't get a chance to tune into this one, but yeah, like you said, not overly surprised, and definitely not surprised that after losing to basically the team that they probably felt like they could have had a chance to beat, they fire their head coach after. So I'm not surprised.
Well, they were in it. Well, yeah, they were definitely in it, but it was just so many penalties. I think they could like double the amount of penalties, and just I don't know, man, like shooting yourself in the foot. But that being said, my boy, what's his name on there? Roberts Tanana. Won't be touching the ball. Not really. Maybe 7 touches, but man, running meters. I think he was like second in the game in running meters.
There we go. If only you got points for that. But hey, you got.
If only we could get points for that, that's right. And it's a struggle because there are players like that you wish would translate into that, and I think it would change the game completely. But yeah, it is interesting.
Stats, please.
Exactly. We'll keep on saying it every single show. Let's break it down. Let's talk about some of these fantasy performances on the Old Glory DC side. Like we said, not many fantasy implications when it comes to this matchup, and that's expected when you have two poor teams that are not necessarily scoring as many points. But in this one, the big one was Penny Lasaka. Vandy, you had him, you dropped him, but he went off for 15.4 fantasy points. I will say one of those tries did come in garbage time at the end of the match.
I dropped him like 3 weeks ago.
Well, hey, 3 weeks, and then it was for this one. There we go.
I was gonna say, don't make it sound like I dropped him like 2 days ago.
Oh wait, no, that's what I did with all the guys that did well.
Okay, and then 5.8 fantasy points for Junior Sao and 5.3 for Appy Naikaitini. So those are the two as well there. And then moving over to the Nola Gold matchup, 12.9 fantasy points for Pat O'Toole, a big one there. Harley Wheeler 6.5, Dino Waldron 5.8, Monty Tongoia 6.2, and then Damian Stevens sneaking in there with 3.5 fantasy points of his own. So yeah, not a terribly exciting matchup there. Not really one that that is was on our docket, at least to say. NOLA Gold or GC, both two teams that are struggling, but some fantasy points to be had. But we knew going into this that it wasn't going to be a fantasy frenzy when it comes to the DC versus NOLA matchup. So let's move on to the Seattle Seawolves LA Guillotines match. This one definitely has fantasy implications. The Guillotines coming out on top 31-12. And again, before I reveal the fantasy performances from this match, guys, I won't ask you what you thought of the match. What I'll ask you, now that we are 8 weeks in, are the LA Guillotines back?
They're back.
They're back?
Dominating performance, man. Dominating.
I mean, hey, they figured out how to score tries. That was their issue.
They dominated.
They figured out how to score tries. But that's the thing, though, Vandy. They knew they were dominating games in the past, but they still couldn't put five in, you know? But this game, they figured it out. This is 2 games in a row now where they're figuring out how to score. And I mean, the Seawolves are coming off a huge win last week. So that's no joke of a team. And Guillotines showed up when they needed to show up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that the Guillotines are starting to get back in a little bit of form here from what they were dealing with earlier in the season. I still think that they can make huge improvements. They still have a lot of players that are still out, that are still waiting for their return. But hey, they're making do with what they have, and yeah, they are looking like they're getting a lot better. I will say the dubs that they've been getting have been against weaker opponents. This week was a little bit of a more prove it win against Seattle Seawolves. I still am not convinced that the Seattle Seawolves are necessarily a top team in the league, but if they can start getting some wins against some San Diego Legion S teams, some Rugby New York S teams, some New England Free Jacks teams as well, if we can get to that tier where the Guillotine is starting to compete, that will go a long way. But I will say this is a very positive sign that they are getting these wins. That I mean, to start the season, there was a huge upset win against the last place, or I should say in the second round, there was the last huge upset against the Houston SaberCats. So they've turned the ship quite a bit from where they were 7 weeks ago, and it looks like they're only trending upwards from here on out. So some performers here from the Guillotines side: Jordan Trainer, 8.3 fantasy points, Joe Tuofete, 12.5 fantasy points, and Jordan Trainer and Hanko Gramicius, 8.1 fantasy points as well. I will say though, Oreen did not get that many fantasy points in this one. But I don't know if you guys saw it. He only got 1. But did you not see that dirty it was so unnecessary, but it was this behind the back pass that was on the sideline to his fullback when they were like resetting off of the kick?
I didn't see it actually.
I'll have to send it to you guys, but yeah, it was so unnecessary. The 40, like, you can just tell that this guy's just enjoying like post-retirement. Like, I would basically call this like his post-retirement like kind of run here in the MLR. Yeah. And dude, this guy catches it on the sideline. He's running back and he just hucks this behind the back spin pass, totally unnecessary to the fullback. I'll have to show you guys, but I thought that was kind of funny.
Hey, but yeah, just another day in the office when you're a vet of the All Black 17.
Well, I'm just picturing it with this Guillotines team. Like, I'm literally like, I think I have a hard time believing that this Guillotines team is like just like out of nowhere playing as badly as they were. I feel like this team, like all of these guys, like Matt Gateau, Adam Ashley Cooper, Oreen Ie, all of these like big name guys are just like chilling around there. Oh, is it time to pick it up now? Okay, yeah. I guess today, this week we'll start playing. We might
not make playoffs. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Now we'll start going. It's kind of like the NBA mentality, you know. I don't know. Obviously that's not the way, but it just feels like that when you have a bunch of older guys that obviously these are like the golden years or the golden days of their rugby playing days.
I think it's hard. Veteran presence too. I think that's why their set piece is so good. Like, it might not score off it, but man, those lineouts and scrums, like, they were dominating.
You know, maybe Adam Ashley Cooper and you know, as the coach, and then IE as the player coach. Both of them are like, all right, yeah, we'll start pulling out the
listen, kids, you go sit on the sideline and watch Daddy play.
Yeah. Right. And they're both just implementing this stuff. But, I mean, one thing that didn't turn around on the Guillotines was Ryberg still sucks.
Yep.
He still blows. This guy is the quadricep with no balls.
And it is crazy because I think there was a little bit of optimism heading into round 8, at least from some fantasy manager. I know, Matt, you when you dropped him, I'm all done with him. I ain't touching him anymore. But someone did scoop him. Bing Bong Theory in our league, he did scoop him up. And hey, if I was in your league, I think I would have scooped him up too, because a name like that, when you see him on the free agency wire and you see him starting in the upcoming week, hey, why not throw a shot, a dart throw? Obviously, it didn't work out for Wes.
Of course, it's the week, but I have no bench spots, man.
Well, this is the thing, though. This is the detriment to Matthew's point, and we'll get into the breakdown. All John Ryberg had to do was either get 1 try assist, get 2 points, even just stay on the field for like 10 more minutes to get the full 80 minutes played. Wes would not have lost by literally 0.1 of a point in his fantasy matchup.
Mind you, Wes, he scored more points for you than he's ever scored for me. So you're a lucky man. You're a lucky man.
Well, yeah. So John Ryberg, not looking too hot in that matchup. I will say it will be interesting, and we will do this in a future episode, hopefully in the next coming weeks, is to look back at where guys were drafted and where they are right now, because I think there are so many players in our league that were drafted with such high expectation, with such optimism, with such like notion that these are guys who are going to be the centerpiece of my team. If I at the very least, I might, botch a couple draft picks in the later rounds. I might not have those players, but at least I'll have 1 or 2 guys that I drafted in the first and 2 rounds that will be centerpieces. And that's what you expect in other fantasy sports. Those are your most reliable guys. And that is not the case. We have first rounders who are busts. We have second rounders who are busts. I think every single round, you probably had there was a chance that those players were going to bust, and it seems like there was a higher frequency of that in this league as opposed to other fantasy leagues that I play with. And like I said, some of the names to mention: John Ryberg is among them, DTH Vandermeer is among them. The list goes on and on and on.
I'm pretty familiar with the names. If you need me to list them all,
we'll pass by that. I feel like you stared at that list long enough, and you probably have looked at that way too many times. So we'll save you the struggle and the misery there. But the Giltini's team, obviously there's certain players that are emerging. Matt, you were able to hop on Luke Burden, who came back. He came back last week, was able to come in this week. He took over kicking responsibilities this week, so he's able to score you some solid points there. Let's just shift over to the Seattle Seawolf side to see what fantasy performances had on that side. Loaina Futi, 7.1 fantasy points. James Malcolm, 6.6 fantasy points. And like I said, not a correlation, or not a coincidence, I should say, that the Seawolves only scoring 12 total points in the match, and there aren't many fantasy performers in this match for Seattle guys as well. So I think a lot to be said with this Giltini squad, more so. I think, like how in the Rugby Atlanta New England Free Jacks match, how that told me a lot about the New England Free Jacks, this one I think told me a lot more about the Giltinis than it did the Seawolves, and I'm excited to see how the Giltinis carry this moving forward. So going into the last 2 matchups here, Vandy begged me to not get into this matchup, but we got to talk about it. Hey, with the struggles, Vandy, you got to take them, because that's just going to make whenever Utah comes around to competing and hopefully eventually for you winning that championship, it'll make it that much more sweeter. But as of right now, not looking like that. They only were able to score 12 fantasy points against a Houston SaberCats team that was able to put up 28. They come out with the dub there. Pretty exciting matchup. Houston SaberCats, I think, is a pretty decent team. They've made miles and miles of improvements from not getting a win in last season. Utah Warriors, though, they're a little bit concerning here. Guys, thoughts on this matchup? Vandy, I'll go to you first to talk about your favorite boys. No comment. No comment.
You know what? Okay. I've been patient. I'm a Colorado Avalanche fan. I was patient all through high school. Okay. The problem with this game was we were the better team compared to hockey. While I'm on that track, it's like watching a game where you put up 40 shots and the other team put up 12 and they beat you 4-2. It was a gut punch. We were, 3 times the passes, 3 times the ball carries. They had double the tackles. Our set piece was better. They had 2 yellow cards. They conceded more penalties. And statistically, you hear all that. It's like, okay, what team lost? No, they doubled our points and more. Honestly, Clive and Lobster, good game. He was about probably, in my opinion, the only good thing we had going. But man, that was a tough one. It was a tough watch. It was pounding your head against a wall, and then they'd come, with a steal or with this or that big play. It was driving me nuts. Dylan Smith or whatever, that guy can just kick it, and he got his own kick. Like, the guy's I don't know. It was tough to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I thought you guys basically didn't stand a chance when I watched Labu Sekne.
Oh, I think I know. Wait, hold on. I think I got this. I actually was practicing this because someone commented on our YouTube video. You got to use the right. You got to use the back of your throat. And then I was listening to the match, and this time I put the sound on. I think it's Labu Sekne.
Okay, Labu Sekne absolutely stepped. I don't know who the winger was on Utah, but oh my gosh,
I think it was Teo.
The guy just stopped and said, "Oh no, I lost. I got beat by Labuchny," and that was it. And I saw that, and I said, one, I can't believe Steven picked this dude up before me. Two,
I'm not even trying to be like
what a beast,
like homer or bias. Houston didn't even play that well. They honestly didn't. It sounds like I'm being a homer, but they aren't like.
Well, let's talk about it from a fantasy perspective, because maybe that'll put in a little bit more clarity on who and what did well.
Wait, hold on. Before we get into that, this was a big game, Fandy, for
this
Lasik.
was a big game. That's why
I don't know if you saw Lasik, but that guy's built like a prop and plays center. Were you excited to see him out there? Because that was his first game in a Utah jersey, and that guy is huge.
And I will say Fitzy from Rugby Morning has been waiting for the past, I think, like 6 weeks to play that guy. So the wait well worth it, because he was able to come in and make an impact. But yeah, that guy's a beast.
Fandy, he used to be a fullback.
Yeah, I think he got a try, didn't he?
Yeah, he got a try. Yeah. He ran in from the 22-meter line on a crash ball and said, "Yeah, try and tackle me."
Yeah, he's a big boy. He got 5.6 fantasy points on the week in his very first starting appearance. So that's an optimistic sign for him. Yeah, he's a big boy that can break tackles and get through. And when you have that, you get fantasy points can be had when you have that ability to break through and get those big time plays. So so I'm really excited to see what Policy has. I will say this, Vandy, and I'll ask you this before I move on to the fantasy results with this match. Has your fandomship for the Utah Warriors wavered at all?
Never.
You know what? I just wanted to check in, man. I just want to make sure.
Fan, you got to be able to when everybody's like circled, when everybody's just like loving on your team and they're like, "We're the best." It helps to have the memories when you were getting dragged through the mud, and you could pull that out and be like, "Yeah, I was around for those days."
Yeah, just wait until maybe you lose to DC.
Like being a Colorado fan, I could say I was. Like after the WAD days, Abisher, sick.
Right. I guess it makes it that much.
Sick.
It makes it that much more worth it. So Utah Warriors, those were the performances there with the Seek, and then Houston SaberCats. Big performances by Gideon Van Wyck, 10.9 fantasy points there. Yeah, Jerry Labuschagne, 6.5 fantasy points for him, and then Dean Muir coming through with 5.6 of his own, and Willie Britz as well, putting up 6.1 fantasy points too. Points scored by Houston, which means solid fantasy points for the players as well. They come up with a big dub against the Utah Warriors. And then lastly here, this is kind of the last matchup of the match, our last matchup of the round, and this one was a little bit tougher, at least from a fantasy perspective. And while watching this match, man, it felt like I was going through like 4 different seasons. It would be snowing one time, it would be sunny the next, and then it's windy, and then it's snowing again. It's just like, what the heck is going on? And then you think for a split second, oh, okay, maybe they're playing up in Canada, in Toronto, and that's why they're dealing with the crazy weather. But no, it's in New Jersey where this is all happening, and it didn't make for necessarily a high scoring matchup between Rugby New York and Toronto Arrows. The Arrows coming out on top, surprisingly, 14-10. They were struggling, and they were able to take down a very, very hot Rugby New York team. Surprised about the upset win here for Toronto Arrows, or I should say, maybe the lack of scoring from Rugby New York, especially after those comments, Matt, from last week about how effective the backline has been looking so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, hey, like I think the backline really originated from that center combo, and that center combo was broken up this week with Emery on coming off the bench, I believe. So, I mean, I think that's where really there's a big start. And remember, Hayden's not in. Sam Windsor was coming off the bench, although he didn't do much when he did come off the bench. So it's not the same backline, but I think this was a big one for
I mean,
New
they
York.
should still, regardless of what, I guess, certain backline play, like the core is there, right? And they should be beating a Toronto Arrows team, but for some reason they just couldn't get anything done. But maybe we're not giving enough credit to the Arrows team. Their defense was pretty stout. Like they were solid, and it looks like that might be the way the Arrows might be playing this. It seems like they're doing a lot of the gritty, kind of just grinded in your face type game style, and winning the games dirty and physical. If you can keep them down and play defense like that, you can win matches, and they did just that against Rugby New York. But the thing is, when you have these low-scoring defensive matchups, 14-10. Not much fantasy points to be had with these. There wasn't much kicking. There wasn't much points period for at least the Toronto Arrows. The leader was Andrew Quattrin, who got 7.5 points. John Sheridan, Matt and I actually played with him. He's a former member of the Markham Irish Rugby Football Club. Back in the GTA in Canada, and we played with John Sheridan, but he scored 8.3 fantasy points
with John Sheridan
this past week. Yeah.
I was talking to Ryan before the match. I said, "Oh, it'd be jokes if I just picked up the old man, John Sheridan, put him on the squad. That'd be. I need a back. I should just pick up Johnny Sheridan." I see him score the try after not picking him up, and I tell Ryan, "Oh my gosh, of course he scores a try." Next person, Andrew Quattrin, goes on. The only hooker in the entire weekend, maybe for the entire 8 rounds, to play a full 80 minutes. I pick up the guy coming off the bench, my boy Jack McRogers, who has scored a try in the last 2 games. And the coach decides, we're not going to play him. Quattrin's playing way too well. And, Quattrin deserved it. But, man, that hurt. That one was a tough one.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the two probably pickups that could have determined your week happened in this match. And if you had went with John Sheridan instead of Denon Robinson Bartlett, who got 1 as opposed to 8.3, and if you went with Quattrin, so tough, but that's all right. 8.3, 7.5, like I said, for the Toronto boys. And then for Rugby New York, the fantasy points that were had, Caleb Geiger scoring 5.6 fantasy points, and Ed Fidau coming in huge with 7.3 fantasy points of his own, with that big try from the 22, I believe, in that match, but wasn't enough for Rugby New York to get the win, as the Toronto Arrows come out on top 14-10. And like I said, when you have these low-scoring matches, just not much fantasy points to be had, which was reflective in some of the teams scoring in this week. So those were all of our matchups, some pretty exciting matches. Anything from round 8 that you guys saw particularly before we move on to a Commissioner League update, guys? Anything that stood out to you with regards to performances, fantasy, non-fantasy?
It's nice to see the Arrows boys, the hometown Canadian team, put it up against the fake New York team. So it's nice to see.
Yeah. I hate to double down on the weather, but I feel like there would have been, Toronto got 16 penalties that game. I think they would have kicked a couple more of those penalties into kicks if it wasn't for the poor weather. Because there was a couple early on where I was like, I don't know why you wouldn't kick that, but
yeah, the weather had to play. So, some fun matchups, some big implications. So let's move on to how those matchups had an effect on the official Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League in Commissioner's Yee's League Update. Hear ye, hear ye. It is time for Commissioner Yee's thoughts on the official Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League, giving all of you listeners an update to how our Fantasy Rugby League is going and how the journey of making Fantasy Rugby a reality in the MLR is going. Had a lot of fun fantasy matchups in round 8. This was actually the very first round in which we reset our matchup rotation. So everyone now, before this round, had played each other at least once. So that means we're going back to the same matchups we saw in round 1. And in round 1, we opened the season and opened our inaugural fantasy rugby season with the matchup and the battle of the show hosts between Matt and Vandy, the Rucking Goats, taking on Ruck and Roll. Both of these guys been struggling all season long. And who was able to get the dub? You probably guessed who was able to get the dub, and that was the Rucking Goat. 27.4 fantasy points over Matt's 11 fantasy points. Matt continuing to struggle to get above that double-digit figure. Vandy putting up the second highest fantasy point total on the week, which was a pretty big performance. And that was, yes, without Joe Peterson along the backs of Mitch Wilson, 13.3, and Tuver Vugakoto on Utah scoring as well, 6.6 fantasy points there as well. Damon Torres and Luke Burden scoring 3 each for Matthew. Moving on to the other matchups on the week, Lads on Tour taking on the Dankest Anchors in a matchup of the top of the table. Lads on Tour kind of trying to approach his way on up. The Dankest Anchors trying to take back that top position at the top of the table. He was able to get the dub, 34.6 fantasy points, scoring the highest fantasy matchup total of the week against John John's 24.3 fantasy points. It was off of the back of Joe Tofetti on the Guiltini, scoring 12.5 fantasy points, and the Free Jacks also pitching in there as well with their set piece and bonus point of 5 fantasy points. Lads on Tour, Ed Fidau's try of 7.3 fantasy points was not enough. Moving on to the second fantasy matchup of the week, Victoria's Secret beating the Feral Hippies. And yes, that is the Feral Hippies owned by Steven in his very first fantasy matchup of his career. I will say as well, he has lots of rugby experience, but he mentioned to me, Vandy, that he is kind of opposite of you. He is a avid rugby fan who has never played fantasy sports. So it'll be interesting to see, to correlate and compare between you and him on how that kind of goes.
Well, welcome
but
to
nonetheless, he was able to put...
Yeah, you picked the hardest sport.
He did pick the hardest sport, but I think his knowledge might begin to play tough this week, but we'll see whether or not he can pick up and pick it up next week and learn more of the ropes here. But yeah, Jerry Labuschagne, the 6.5 fantasy points was not enough to take down Hanko Germicius's 8.1 fantasy point performance, totaling up to that 26.7. And then in the last matchup of the week, in the lowest scoring matchup in the week, in the tightest matchup of the week, Rugby Morning taking on number 1 placed Bing Bong Theory. And by 0.1, yes, listeners, you heard me right, with 0.1 fantasy points, he was able to get the dub and upset Bing Bong Theory, taking him down from that top spot in the league. And it only took 7.1. It was a nail biter, and there were a lot of roster decisions that could have been made, and I feel like the right ones were made for Rugby Morning, the wrong ones were made for Wes and Bing Bong Theory. So unfortunately, he gets the loss, and that was on top of a -4 yellow card from Jesse Parity, who made his debut for New England, and even with that penalty, Rugby Morning was still able to come away with the dub. So those are our 4 matchups of round 8. We'll have exciting matchups coming up in round 9, but a little bit of a shuffling of the standings here, guys. Don't have it right in front of me. I will have it updated for our league members and the rest of our Discord community members. Moving forward, it will be released on our socials as well, but I do believe that I think we have another retaking of the number 1 spot in our league. I do think that Dankest Anchors retakes that number 1 spot at the top of our league. So Hokie remains or retakes what he had when he had that undefeated season going over West of Bing Bong Theory. So those are the latest matchup results and fantasy performances in round 8. Some other announcements, guys. This is an announcement that I had to make for you guys, and I wanted to keep it for the show. Haven't mentioned it to you guys, but we have our very first fantasy rugby trade. Let's go. Fantasy rugby trade happened in our league, and I'm going to announce it here on the show for the first time before I announce it in our roster moves channel in our Discord. I wanted to make it a little bit of a big deal here, guys, because this is the first trade that's happening ever. Our first fantasy rugby trade happening ever. I don't want to say in the history of fantasy rugby, but at least in the history of our fantasy rugby in the MLR, it is the very first trades that's happening. So we got to etch this in stone and make this a memorable one, I guess. But yes, a trade has been made, and who do you ask that made the trade? It was between, of course, Dankus Anchors, Hokey, wheeling and dealing, making the moves. And it's actually with our brand new league member, Steven, takes over this new team, gets things done, has a vision, knows what he needs to get done to get back on top, and makes a deal. It is Cam Dolan of the Feral Hippies of Steven, moving him to the Dankest Anchors in exchange for Dean Muir. So front row of Houston, Dean Muir, going to the Feral Hippies in exchange for back row of NOLA, Cam Dolan. So an interesting 1-for-1 move there. I guess it satisfies a front row or a front row need for the Feral Hippies and a back row second row need for the Dankest Anchors, and we'll see how that trade plays out. But that's pretty exciting, guys. Our very first fantasy rugby trade has been officially made in our league.
Homie comes in just making waves, Like,
and I love it. I absolutely love it. And, you love to see when, they know what needs to be done to get back on top. And it's not going to be just sitting on your hands doing nothing. So you got to make the pickups. You got to make the trades. And it looks like Steven's doing just that. And we love to see it. So congratulations to those two teams for making the very first trade in the official Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League. And I'm encouraging all of our league members, Matt, Vandy, I told you guys we need to get a trade done on the show. That is one of my goals. So we'll see whether or not we can get that. I would like for you guys to have negotiations outside the show so we don't spend the full hour just having you two talking back about how bad
back and forth.
Exactly. So we'll see whether or not we can get that done. But I do encourage all the other fantasy managers as well in our league to start talking with each other and start cooking up some trades, because, hey, it could be a win-win situation for both of you getting players that you need, because I know there are a lot of teams in our league that have positional needs. Vandy with a scrum half. No. Matt with a fly half.
Matt with an entire team. What are you talking about? How do I trade for an entire team?
And he's
why don't you ask Hokey if you can just swap teams?
I don't want Hokey's team.
You don't want whose team do you want?
I don't want. I'm stuck. There's no. You can't trade your shoes in this world. You just keep living the one that you're in.
Can.
And I respect that, Matt. I respect that. I respect that you're sticking with it. So yeah, there is the very first trade of the Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League. Cam Dolan moving for Dean Muir. We'll announce that in our Discord channel, but that is very exciting. I was pumped up to share that with everyone. Wanted to announce that on the show, and hopefully we see more trades moving forward for the rest of the season. So with that being said, that is the entirety of Commissioner Yee's notes on the league, giving you guys an update on how our league is standing right now and the latest roster moves. Apparently, trades have now become a thing in the Fantasy Ruckers Rugby League. So can't wait to see more of those. Now let's move on to a look ahead here, guys, to round number 9 of the MLR rugby season. Got some exciting matchups. I'm going to list them out here for you as always, and then we can talk about which ones you're looking most forward to heading into round 9. We do have a matchup on Friday this week. So fantasy managers, make sure you keep that in mind. You guys do need to set your lineups before that first matchup on Friday. I believe it's a later matchup. I think it's not until 10 o'clock Eastern time. So you are going to have a little bit of extra time to get that in on Friday. And I will say, moving forward, I know it's kind of been back and forth when it comes to the waiver transaction period. But now that I'm talking about it, to make it clear for all of our league members and all of our listeners and you, Matt and Vandy as well, from here on going forward, waiver period will always be processed on Thursday night. I know I've been doing it on Friday nights ahead of the games, but regardless of the matchup whenever the matchups start that week, whether it's Friday, whether it's Saturday, it does not matter. I'm going to have them process every week on Thursday to keep it consistent. So moving forward, league members, make sure you're getting in your waiver claims by Thursday night midnight Eastern time for those to be processed. So a little bit of announcement there. So let's get into it. Utah Warriors taking on the San Diego Legion on Friday. Utah Warriors sitting in 6th place in their Western Conference against the San Diego Legion, who are sitting in 2nd. They're 2-5 right now. The Warriors, Legion 4-3. The Arrows are taking on Rugby Atlanta on Saturday. The Free Jacks taking on the NOLA Gold. Rugby New York taking on Old Glory DC. The Giltinis taking on the Dallas Jackals. The Gilgronis taking on the Sabercats. And it is the Seattle Seawolves on bye this week, which is pretty incredible, man. They have literally played every single week this season so far. This is the very first time they're getting a bye. And I feel like other teams have got in, maybe not multiple bye, but I feel like other teams have definitely gotten a better break than the Seattle Seawolves. But regardless, out of those matchups, guys, what are you looking most forward to? It looks like we got a full slate with only one team on bye.
I don't know why they don't do the Friday game more often. Why do they continue to do the weekend games at the same time and, try to stuff a bunch of games on Saturday and have one game on Sunday? It doesn't make any sense to me on why you would make it harder for viewers to see the games.
Do you think it's a logistics thing? It could be a logistics thing. I don't know. I agree with you. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to try to spread the games out over the course of the weekend so that you can get more eyes on each game. But I don't know. I enjoy the Friday games. I enjoy having them spread out. Makes it easier for me to stat out these games. As you can tell, it's taken a little bit longer these past couple of weeks because they've been so jumbled up. So I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of to deal with that. But I do like the Friday games, and I would encourage the MLR to schedule it in that manner going forward. But we'll see.
It looks like, but in the matchups, it looks like Giltinis can look for an easy win, and we're not going to learn too much from that. And same with Rugby New York. Hopefully, get back on their feet after losing to the Arrows.
But I will say though, those two matches, if you got Rugby New York players, you got LA Giltinis players, I would be quite stoked to have those guys. Maybe this is the week that you can maybe start eyeing some of those Giltinis guys. Maybe the lineup changes a little bit. I don't know, but there are some notable Giltinis guys that are in the waiver wire that you could start looking at as they face a really poor Dallas Jackals team who it should be a blowout. They're missing 9 guys. They've lost 9 players of their team, 3 of which are, or at least 2 of which are severe injuries that are notable players on their team. So I would expect that the Giltinis would wipe this away. So maybe you do start looking at some of those Giltinis players.
Yeah, maybe, but they probably will suck once I start them. So it doesn't really matter. The only other game that I'm excited to see is honestly, Vandy. I don't know. Maybe you can find your way out of Tillsonburg and get to the city of Toronto. And maybe find yourself at the Arrows matchup for their first home game in 1,000 days.
True.
And hey, with that, they're going to be home. Atlanta's going to have to travel across the border to the cold weather. Maybe Arrows end up at the end of this match having the same record as Rugby Atlanta, someone who we thought was the top team last week.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because when I was going through the standings too, guys, no one's running away with this. Outside of Old Glory DC and the Dallas Jackals, who are at the bottom at 0-7, you could argue that maybe the Free Jacks are kind of separating themselves because they're sitting at 6-1. But if you take the Dallas Jackals, let's say you take the Jackals and DC out of it, you're ranging from 6-1 to 2-5. That's not terrible. And then a majority of your bulk teams in the middle are all at 4-3. Arrows 4-3, Legion 4-3, Rugby Atlanta 5-2, Giltinis 4-3, Rugby New York 5-2. They're all within 1 or 2 losses of each other, so it's really up in the air. But yeah, that's a good point, man. I didn't even think of that. And Vandy, maybe you aren't aware of this, but since you're just getting into the MLR this season, but last year because of COVID and everything, and because of the border, the Toronto Arrows actually had to play their entire season out of Atlanta. So they did not have a home game basically for the entire season. They're returning for the first time this weekend. They've had, I think all away games so far this year, and the season so far. Obviously, that has to do with some of the logistics behind being the only Canadian team. But yeah, they might be bumping at the Toronto Arrows, and you're going against a side that if you can win, you're really proving it to your home crowd that you're in it to win it here. Yeah, this Arrows matchup, you might have talked me into the Matt. I think I'm looking forward to this one the most this weekend. Arrows versus Rugby Atlanta should be a lot of fun.
And I think I'm going to get you some tickets.
Utah and Legion, baby. Yeah, you gave me some tickets, dog?
Yeah,
we'll get you some tickets.
We'll get you a plane ticket down to Utah. Maybe that's what they need. The in-person
Arrow tickets. I'll go.
The in-person moral support. All right, let's see if we can try to get to Vandy out to his
video. Hey, I'll take a video on my phone and have better quality than.
Hey, there we go.
There you go. But yeah, I think we can all say that we're looking for the Toronto Arrows Rugby Atlanta match. But from a fantasy perspective, I would really look at. The reason why it's so hard, I feel like, to pick a solid matchup is because I feel like outside of maybe that match, really all of and maybe the Gilgronis Sabercats match, because the Gilgronis seem like they're kind of on a downturn, but they are coming off the bye. I mean, Giltinis are playing a poor team. Rugby New York's playing a poor team. New England Free Jacks are playing a poor team. So from a fantasy perspective, there should all be points there. May not be the most fun matches to watch, but at least from a fantasy perspective, it'll be fun watching those numbers tally up for Giltinis New York.
Make sure you pick up your boys from those teams, and just remember, if I drop them, you pick them.
Maybe I'll actually do that this week. Just pick up guys that you drop.
Just try different strategies. I mean, Matt went with the blitz waiver wire the week before, and then this week he kind of toned it down a little bit, and then maybe Vandy, your strategy.
Helped me, so.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go. All right. Well, hey, that's just about does it here for the round 9 preview, and we recapped all of round 8. Exciting fantasy stuff to go. And guys, we're only half away, just a little over halfway through the season when it comes to at least the fantasy rugby season. So with that being said, there are many more hopefully wins to come with your guys' teams. Matt, I'm still rooting for you. I'm still thinking you can turn it around.
Don't get your hopes.
We'll see whether we can do that.
Did I pass Steven?
You may have passed Steven. When I come out with the updated standings, you may be in 6th.
I don't know. I'm not okay with that. That's not okay. No.
We'll have to find out. Well, let's you know what? Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. Let's try to find why it's okay. And we'll talk to Vandy with the hot mic here to get his opinion on why it's okay that he's in 6th place.
Well, you know what? Let me tell you right now. Like I said at the beginning of the year, I bring winning. I thought I was going to bring winning to Utah. I guess I just bring winning to fantasy as per usual. I mean, I try to make it close with Matt. I still want him to run the show with us. I didn't want him to run off. But now that we're getting close to playoffs, it's time to, really dig deep, pull out the playoffs here, baby. But more importantly, Utah, speaking of digging deep, it's time. You want to make a playoff run? It's now. I still believe, like I said, if I got to go through this year getting pulled through the trench, I will. And I'll go down kicking and screaming. And so will you. Let's pull it a big dub, pull it out, beat the Legion, tell old man Joe to sit down, hold my beer. We're going to stomp you.
There we go. That was a good one. I don't know. Maybe that'll be enough to finally align the stars. But I feel like out of all weeks, see, this is where it's going to get conflicting for you, Vandy, because this week, your favorite team is playing the team that you have the most players of. So you're really expecting.
This could be fireworks here. We got lightning ball here, baby.
An emotional roller coaster. I think that Friday night matchup is going to be for you, but it's going to be a blast and it'll be a lot of fun. But it should be good.
Utah's going to go 2-6, and Vandy's going to be jumping ship. I can already tell. You're going to be jumping ship, going to San Diego.
I don't know. I think if Vandy could have made it through, the 0-4 start that they had, I think at this point he can go with anything here. But we'll see whether or not they can get the dub this week, and it'll be interesting to see because Vandy said it has yet to happen where it aligns both weeks, fantasy and reality. Hey, I think all this week it's going to take maybe both Utah and San Diego just both need to score 50 points. 51-50 final score and just fantasy points galore. And we'll see whether or not that will be enough to get both Utah the win and Vandy's fantasy team the win. But with that being said, lots of exciting rugby to come in round 9. And that's going to do it for this show here on episode 12 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. For Devin Vandy Vanderpool, for Matt Yee, I am Ryan Yee as always. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode. Make sure you stay tuned and keep on joining us on the journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.